Welcome everyone to our WFAA Victory Park studio. I'm joined by my colleagues in our home away from home to talk about a very special topic close to our hearts. Each of us has been touched deeply by an adoption journey. My family has adopted from the foster care system. Chris was adopted at birth. Kalee and Jobin adopted domestically, and Paige adopted internationally. So let's start by diving a little deeper into our own personal stories. And Chris, since adoption has been a part of your life the longest, let's start with you.
I guess so. Very true. Well, like you said, I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective because I was adopted. It was through Catholic Charities. I was a baby. I think I was about, I want to say about 5 months old, maybe. This was back during the days of adoptions were closed, so there was not really much information about the birth parents, although my mom was able to share a little bit about that with me, just that it was a very young woman who got pregnant at a very young age. It was an interracial relationship, which at that time, about 50 years ago, for a young woman in an interracial relationship was a very, very tough situation. And so she placed me up for adoption, and my mom and dad got me when I was about 5 months old.
Wow, we're gonna dive deeper into that. But Jobin, let's talk about your adoption journey.
So her name is Aria. She's 3 years old. This was a private, domestic infant adoption. Every adoption story is very different. She's the best thing that's ever happened to us. She's feisty. She is very into herself, and she knows what she's doing. She can hold her own. You know, our situation is a little different in that we do have 2 biological children as well. Mm-hmm. So we have 2 biological children and an adopted child, and they all love each other all the time.
Amen. Kalee, your story?
So we have a 3-year-old as well, my husband and I. Her name is Mila. And again, we adopt her from birth, and we have an open adoption with her birth mother. So we continue to keep in contact, and she's got several half siblings as well. And it is amazing. She has blessed our lives in so many ways, just like very into herself, has to do everything by herself. And it's so cool to see her develop with characteristics of ours as well as she continues to grow, and it's just really cool to see. And I don't know what I would do without her, so it's pretty awesome.
She is cute as a bunny.
She's going to be way taller than me, though.
Right. Well, yeah.
Paige, you adopted internationally.
I did. And I had the privilege, because before I started this career, I worked at the Gladney Center for Adoption. I had the privilege of seeing lots of families being built and completed through the miracle of adoption. And so that was something that I had always dreamed of doing. I also have 2 biological boys. And I went on a mission trip to Guatemala. And in the United States, we don't have orphanages, but in many other countries those exist. And that's, you know, we're a place where many children reside. Sometimes it's a much smaller caregiver to child ratio. Children adopted internationally, many of them thrive, but sometimes they can have challenges developmentally. So after that experience, I decided that this was something I wanted to do, and was thrilled about it and committed to it. And our entire family, with my boys included, went to Colombia. And the day before we went to the orphanage, I said, what am I doing? What on earth am I doing? And I thought, I brought these children of mine to this country, you know, to meet this child that I've never met before. And when they brought her to me, I thought, there you are. There you are. Where have you been? So she is the light of our lives. She's the youngest and the only girl, 2 older brothers, so she probably won't date until she's 35. She's 11 years old, but she is ours.
Well, you know, Paige, your story and mine are very connected because we both adopted through the Gladney Center for Adoption. So we are both Gladney moms. Yes. And I actually reached out to Paige when Captain Awesome and I decided that we wanted to adopt a child. And we reached out to her, and she sent us to Gladney immediately. And so we adopted my amazing 4-year-old Henry, who we love so much. As many of you know, I have worked with foster children beyond my time here at WFAA, and I always knew in my heart that a child was growing there. So when the time was right, I talked with Jeremy about it, and we agreed it was time to adopt. And if you adopt through Gladney, there are 3 different ways that you can do so. And in the end, the way we chose was through the foster care system. And we'll dive into that a little deeper later. But Henry's my man, and I can't wait till you're old enough to see this, Henry.
Yeah.
So how did you decide that adoption was right for your family?
I think through a lot of prayer, and I have to really say that I was kind of driven in that direction. You know, when I made that choice, the hardest thing was kind of trying to convince my husband to kind of be on that same page and be on that same journey, and eventually he got there. And I just somehow knew at that time that this was really the right choice. And to be able to kind of offer that a family to a child who may otherwise not have that experience was really important to me. But what I underestimated was how much joy, how I'm the blessed one. You know, I'm the one that feels, I'm the one that feels like, you know, the most blessed.
Absolutely.
Because this child has brought so much love and joy, and that was underestimated. You know, you're giving something to a child, which is a permanent family, but what you don't realize is the joy that you are receiving in that process and in that journey. She's been with us now. We got her at 6 months old, and she's now 11, and I cannot imagine a day without her.
I know you're echoing how we all feel about it. You know, you think, a lot of people think, oh, what you've done for this child. And the immediate response for me is, oh,
no.
What that child has done for us. Right. So in our case, like I said, I had been working with foster children for many, many years. It started when I worked in Albuquerque, and Henry had been growing in my heart for a very long time. And so when I met Jeremy, who I like to call Captain Awesome, we talked about it on our 3rd date. In fact, Jeremy brought it up to me, and you know, asked me if I would ever consider adoption. And I said, well, funny you mentioned that, because I've been working with foster children my entire life, and this is definitely something that I want to do one day. So we already knew this before we got married, that we were going to adopt a foster child one day. And so when the twins, Karina and Simon, went into kindergarten, we said, all right, well, now's the time. So in our household, it was just meant to be. And I do believe that it's a calling, right? I think it's a calling when you adopt a child, and it's a calling that God placed in my heart long, long ago. So you always hear the term, it takes a village when you're raising kids. So Kalee, let's start with you. Let's talk about your village. Who did you turn to when you went to adopt Mila?
Well, what's interesting is, and I think you guys could probably all attest to this, when we started going through the adoption process, it's amazing how many other people were also in that family that you didn't even realize were, and that I would go to day in and day out. Everybody was different. Everybody had a different story like us, but they were there. Several coworkers, I was living in Chicago at the time, and several coworkers walked me through, held our hands. Our social worker with the adoption agency we used in Chicago is like a family member. And I would text her, I would call her constantly to ask her questions. And it was kind of nice because she was there for us in the hospital along with our birth mother, who had somebody as a social worker for her as well. So kind of held her hand, and we all kind of worked together through the process that was, you know, amazing but scary for all of us. And so that was really the big thing, is having that social worker there and somebody who knew the right answers to the right questions, as well as friends that I didn't even know had been experiencing the same thing.
And interesting you say that, because you were kind of around a lot of resources as well, Paige, especially working for the Gladney Center for Adoption. So who was your village? And as time has gone on, who have you turned to for resources?
Well, the Gladney Center, of course, has been a huge village. I mean, I'd been there for a number of years. They've placed over 30,000 children in permanent homes, so I had a big, huge support system. And that was very helpful, because I trusted that system, I knew that system, and I knew that I believed that process would ultimately result in a permanent adoption. But beyond that, I turned to my immediate family. My sister was so prevalent. It sometimes requires a circle of sisters sometimes, because adoption often is driven by women. And she was a big part of that process and kind of holding my hand through that whole journey. And then my faith, too. I think my community of faith was really important as well. So it does take a village. It is a scary process, even with as much knowledge as I had. Sometimes having too much knowledge is not necessarily a good thing. So, but having as much knowledge as I had, those individuals that came forward and kind of guided me along the process. You know, you can be a physician, but when you're on the operating table, it's a whole new world. And as an adoption professional, still going through it, it felt like a completely different experience. And those people were very important to me.
You know, it's a scary process, and it's also a beautiful process with lots of surprises. So, Jobin, what is one thing about adoption that has turned out differently than you thought it would?
Well, since we now all have children, surprises is part of the game, right? Like at this point, and surprises still come up, right? And so one thing we realized in terms of at least announcing the adoption itself to our family and friends are the responses we got from people, good and bad. And we realized much later, after we've talked about, hey, we're thinking about adoption, the bad reactions weren't all that bad, and the good reactions were great, you know? And the other surprise that, you know, that does come up is we adopted a black girl. My wife is not white, is white, and I'm Indian. Neither of us are black. And so that became a challenge that we took head on, because we wanted to make sure that she kept her cultural identity.
Good for you.
Right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, working it into our family identity. And so that is something that we are working through every day, hoping that she feels empowered in the way she looks, and the way she acts, and the way she feels.
You know, you mentioned in the way she looks. It's something that has stayed with me that you said long ago when we were doing our reports about La Vida and about Hispanic culture. You want people to see color, right?
Yeah.
Because then you see their heritage, and then you see their culture.
Then you see who they are. Yeah.
So, Kalee, what was one thing that you didn't expect when you adopted?
Well, so mine kind of, when I was starting to adopt, I did not think I was not wanting to be a part of an open adoption. The ignorance of not knowing the process, I thought, I don't want to have that can of worms opened. Then when we started the process and learning how important it is for a child to know their story and to understand how beautiful their story is, and we learned about the open adoption process and having that relationship and kind of combining two different families. At first I was thinking it was co-parenting, which it's nothing like that. So I think the biggest surprise for me is just how amazing the open adoption has been and how it's another branch of our family, and just being able to show her, you know, when she comes to me and wants a brother or sister, and I'm not going to do that, but I say, you've got several. And it's amazing that we can have that relationship and be able to give her that. I think that's the biggest surprise for me, is how much I love, and I didn't think I was going to like that.
I think that dovetails into the next question that I had for y'all. How do you talk to your kids about adoption? And I'll start because adoption in my household, it's normal. It's been very normalized. We have other children in our extended family who are adopted, and it's been easy. That part has been easy for us because we've got two biological children older than Henry, and we just talked to all three of them at the same time. And I told the older two, y'all were born and grew in mommy's stomach. Henry, you grew in my heart. Okay, and so that's just the way it is in our household. And when we talk about the day that Henry was adopted, it's not even your gotcha day anymore. It's the day that Henry was born into our family. And so that's just been easy for us. How about you, Paige?
It's been very easy. And we're a multicultural family as well. She is a Latina. And recently she said, you know, I wish I had blue eyes like yours instead of brown.
Because she loves her mom.
Yeah, well, and I said, oh, honey, your brown eyes are what makes you so beautiful. It's what makes you so unique. And that process has been a lot more seamless than I anticipated it to be. I was concerned about, how she would feel, if she would feel unique, but not necessarily in a positive way, but uncomfortable with it. She had some differences.
Chris, how do y'all talk about adoption in your household?
The funny thing is, when I was a kid, I don't remember a big sit-down conversation to say, hey, you were adopted. I just always knew, which tells me that my mom and dad talked about it at such an early age that, I just knew. I have no memory of being like sat down and said, hey, we want to tell you something. I just always knew, which means they were talking about it from, the time I was a baby. I do remember, it's something you said really resonated with me. I do remember there was one time when I can't remember how old, but I was a little boy, and I saw something on TV, and it really upset me, and I was just sobbing, and my mom came in and said, sweetie, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I don't know why, I just had such a reaction. I said, did my mom, does she not want me? Why didn't she want me? And that was the exact thing she said. She said, she did want you. She just couldn't take care of you. And, you didn't grow in my, my stomach, but you grew in my heart. You were always, always there in my heart. And it just made such a big difference to me. And years later, this was probably only about 4 years ago, I was talking with my aunt, and she told me this story about my grandma, my dad's mom. She said, when your mom was pregnant with David's my brother, so my mom got pregnant, I don't know, it was my brother and I were probably about 10 years apart. So my aunt was telling me, when your mom got pregnant, somebody at work came to your grandma and said, well, aren't you excited? Now you're gonna have a real grandson. And she stopped them right there and said, I already have a real grandson. I have a grandson, and his name is Chris. And I'm so happy to have another grandson. But it made me feel so loved, but it was kind of bittersweet because my grandma passed away, 25 years ago. And I wish I could have known that story. And I wanted to give her a hug so badly. It was like, I never knew that happened. And it just meant, the world.
And it's one thing I wish, when you often hear about adoption, you think of the triangle. And the triangle often represents the adoptive parents, the child, and the birth parents, whether it's domestic or international. And we don't have that triad represented here. But I had the privilege, when I was working at Gladney, to be with some birth mothers at the point of delivery, at the point of placement. And I will never forget one in particular, because it is not a matter of not wanting a child or giving a child away. It's about making a plan for a child. It's about recognizing one's limitations and wanting a better life for a child. And she was in that delivery room and she was holding her baby. And as she kissed her baby, right before she handed it to a social worker, she said, and you're gonna get to go to Disney World. Mm-hmm. Because she had never had that opportunity. And that is, I think, speaks to, the love that so many of these brave, courageous women from all over the world, what they are doing on behalf of their child and how much they love their child, that they're willing to make that sacrifice on behalf of their child.
I will say
that's bravery.
Our birth mother, I was blessed to be able to, she handed me Mila. And she said, I do not want her to ever feel like I didn't love her. Mm. And I said, that will never happen. And she handed her to me, and we both cried, and it was a moment that I will always cherish. And it wasn't a cry of, it was a mix of sadness, and because on her worst day, it was my best day. And so it was, and that's why forever I will always do what I can to create that relationship for both of them.
Did you want to add to that, Jobin?
Yeah, it is. We don't talk enough
We don't.
about the sacrifice of birth parents.
Yes.
And how much they break, how much their heart breaks in that moment, and that's not lost on us when we see our child every day, because I'm trying to remember the quote, but that moment where we have this child who still belongs to another parent, and to have that child and say, I'm going to take it from here.
Yes.
And for that parent, that birth parent, to say, I can't do it. That is an ultimate mother's love.
That is an ultimate mother's love. And
Amen.
there's a part of me that's envious that I didn't get to meet Victoria's birth mom. But I do when I look up at the stars, and they're the same stars that I'm sure she stares at. I make a wish on those stars for her, and it's a wish of gratitude.
And I will tell Henry when he's older and when he asks, I know Henry's bio mom and bio dad loved him. They loved him enough to give him up. And that, like you said, is brave. So Chris, you are the only one here who is coming to this conversation from the perspective of the adoptee. What advice do you have for us parents as we raise our kids?
Well, you guys all seem to be doing quite well without any help from me, but I would just say talk about it early. I just think when kids can grow up just sort of knowing without a big revelation day. Obviously, if you're adopting a child who's older, the child will dictate some of how that conversation goes. But if it's a younger child, I would say just talk about it early. Be very open about answering the questions you can. My mom and dad were very open about answering any questions they could. And again, this was back in the day of closed adoptions. There just wasn't the information out there. Although I'm sure now with 23andMe and the DNA searches and Facebook and all the social media, I'm sure if I wanted to, I could probably find out that information. I just myself have never been curious enough to do so, which maybe sounds weird coming from a journalist because we're supposed to be curious all the time.
It's not that
You
uncommon.
got what you needed, Chris.
Yeah, I was dating a girl one time, and the thing about being adopted is like it doesn't come up. You're not out on a date watching a football game and go, hey, by the way, I'm adopted. Did you know that?
Not the best icebreaker.
No, honestly, I have really close friends of mine who have no idea I'm adopted just because it's never come up. But I was dating a girl once, and she shared that she was going to look for her birth parents and start that process. And so I said, oh, wow, I'm adopted too. And I followed along with her journey, but I myself just never felt compelled to do that. I was okay where I was.
And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. That's not uncommon
Yeah.
at all.
So Paige, as we start to close here, what would you say has been the most rewarding part about your adoption journey?
It is defining. It is so meaningful. It was the completion of our family. And the most rewarding part is knowing that she's mine. It's knowing that she's mine.
Jobin?
I don't know any other way outside of everything, I know this is. I always tell you that representation does matter, right? And my family, none of us look alike, right?
Y'all are the United Nations.
Really, and that's beautiful, right? And I think it's important for people to see, in a day and age where we have cultural, racial insensitivities happening way too often in our country. It's important for families to see that these families do work, and we can love each other, and we can, not look like each other still, and Aria is everything to us. And she has two bodyguard brothers who love her, who ask all the right questions, and sometimes wrong questions that we really are quick to say, no, this is the way it is. And so, but it's beautiful, and we wouldn't change one bit of it. And anybody who thinks it's easy is doing it for the wrong reasons and is not ready, because it's every bit of hard.
Yes,
it is. And if you think it's torturous on families taking in children, imagine how torture it is for the mother and father who's giving up their child.
I think I just kind of want to piggyback off of what you're saying with if loving each other. And I think love for me is the biggest reward, because from her, and then learning how to love people that you maybe don't understand or don't connect with or come from a completely different life than they do. But yet you love and you find love. And I think we could learn so much from that just outside of adoption, and just being able to stop judging people and find the connection and find how you can better each other. And I think that's the most rewarding thing, is like, just like you said, she's made me a better person.
Chris?
I mean, I have a mom and a dad, and I have a brother and a family, and I look at how my life might have turned out, and I'm so blessed to have my family.
For me, the most rewarding part has been when this child moved in with us. It was, I love you, Henry. I love you, Henry. And then one day I woke up and I meant it with all my heart. I love you, my son. He has taught us how to be tough. And like you said, Paige, he has completed our family. And that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paige, Kalee, Jobin, for joining me and sharing our stories and to celebrate the love.